Hey everyone. Um, I am Zoë Kors. I'm the work that I do in the world. Well, first of all, I'm an alcoholic. Um, Next, the work that I do in the world is really focused around sex and intimacy, and I work with individuals and couples to have a greater sense of connectedness and to be healthy in those connections. Um, I I also work with sexual reintegration after recovery from sex addiction and betrayal trauma. So that's kind of a separate specialty that I do. Part of my practice is working with people in recovery in that sense. Um, I am I often, I think, come to these sessions with a very distinct plan and sometimes a slide deck. And I've been feeling a little bit under the weather this past couple weeks. I was bitten by a dog, which was really traumatic for me because I'm a huge dog lover and usually the person that all traumatized dogs feel safe with. So after the trauma of that and the pain of that and a tetanus shot and a COVID booster and a flu shot, I'm a little bit under the weather. So I'm going to be speaking a little bit more informally today and leave lots of time for questions and open discussion. I always love, it's a favorite part of these meetings for me, is hearing what you guys are dealing with and having a conversation about that. Um, so today the topic is really this thing called energetic intimacy, which is a term that I defined. And in my book, I talk about it, and the book is really based on the work that I do and the framework that I use to coach clients. And so in it, I define three kinds of intimacy. And those three kinds are emotional, physical, and energetic, right? And it's something that I sort of over the years in my own personal life, like my personal life, of course, is my laboratory. In my personal life, I started to sort of explore this idea. I'm going to read you a little bit, a passage, a story that I tell in my book about oh, this lover that I had. And I might stop along the way to just annotate extemporaneously with my thoughts as because this group is special and intimate. So there might be little things that I include in here a little bit. So this is a story about Owen and my relationship with Owen. We were introduced at a conference by a mutual friend. Owen was a charismatic man in his 60s. He was just my type, artistic, cool, and a capable flirt. From his shaggy hair to his silver jewelry, I was impressed. We connected on social media and he promptly slid into my DMs. Long story short, we texted for 3 days straight, made plans to get together the following week on New Year's Eve, which required some degree of courage because Owen lived an hour and a half from me, and it would likely be unsafe to drive home in the wee hours, given that we, along with everyone else in the city, would be drinking. I was not yet sober. This is many years ago now. But after the intensity of our texting, we had managed to squeeze a couple of months worth of courtship into a very short period of time, and I felt an undeniable ease with this fascinating man. Let's do it, I said. It was fun, exciting, and somewhat bananas. We spent the night telling stories, laughing our asses off, and having some seriously phenomenal sex. Owen was a skilled and generous lover. The next time I saw Owen, I drove out to his house for the weekend. He was waiting in his driveway for my arrival with a glass of wine and a rose he had picked from his garden. Owen's home was enchanting. It was peaceful and delightful, and it became my retreat for the next many months. Owen was a real bon vivant, a passionate conversationalist. He had the best stories and the delivery to match. Entering his world was like a psychedelic trip to a mashup of 1920s Paris, Woodstock, and Burning Man. He was the most sensual creature I'd ever experienced. He could eat and drink and suck and fuck like nobody's business. Hedonism was alive and well and living at Owen's house. It turns out, you guys, I didn't know at the time, because I don't have a history of addiction in my life, like in my family of origin. And I really hadn't experienced this, but he was a raging alcoholic. Actually, literally, I'll talk about that in a minute. But he was an alcoholic, and he was what I now recognize to be a sex and love addict. So that can give you like an idea of the flavor of what was going on in that house. And it was phenomenal until it wasn't, right? So one day, Owen looked deep in my eyes and said, I want to be more intimate with you than I've ever been with anyone. I want to be as intimate as two human beings can be. Like, how that's an invitation, right? What exactly does that mean? I replied with great curiosity. I don't actually know, but will you join me in the endeavor of finding out? Well, that's an invitation I don't think I could refuse. So, with unparalleled intimacy as our North Star, we set forth on our exploration. Intimate we were. We stretched the limits of anything either of us have ever done before sexually. We did things I will very likely never do again. I felt sensations that were new to me, experienced my body in new ways. We could spend all weekend in and out of bed in various states of nakedness. It felt natural, loving, and reverent. We were wholly immersed in each other for hours on end, oblivious to the outside world, undistracted by any preconceived, culturally defined ideas of sex. We were astronauts on a mission, flying through the stars, gathering energy, expanding our awareness. We were fully present to each other in every moment, gazing in each other's eyes for hours, breathing each other's breath. It was otherworldly. It was nourishing. It was intimate. But it was only one part of the story. As time went on with increasing frequency, Owen would react to something I'd say and get angry. We could be talking and laughing one minute, and the next he'd be in a rage about something I said. It was instantaneous, intense, and irreversible. Each time it happened, I found myself down a rabbit hole with him before I knew it, employing all my relational skills to no avail. In each instance, I was at a loss for the source of his rage or even what triggered it. It was telling that when I asked him what he was angry about, he was at a loss too, partly because it often happened when he had been drinking, but more because he was in a triggered state. He was unable to articulate his emotional response. There were things in Owen's past that pointed to unresolved trauma. He was a veteran with combat stories that would make your hair stand on end. He was also the adult child of alcoholics. Though he had lived a productive life for decades, it's possible that some unresolved trauma remained beneath the surface, waiting to be expressed in opportune moments. Potential trauma notwithstanding, there was something about Owen's hedonism that smacked of someone trying to escape the discomfort of unpleasant emotions while they churned beneath the surface. Because he couldn't tolerate the discomfort of looking at himself and his emotions, they came out sideways, randomly and seemingly inappropriate to what was happening in the moment. In the end, Owen lost interest in me as I challenged his emotional fortress. I became less and less available for escapism, and while he was masterful at physical and energetic intimacy, he revealed himself to be unavailable to explore intimacy of the emotional sort. We chalked up our completion to logistical incompatibility and said goodbye. Standing in the same driveway in which he welcomed me into his world 8 months earlier, there was no rose this time. The very next week, in the tender aftermath, grieving the possibility of what might have been, my phone blew up with texts and voicemails from concerned friends who had been connected with Owen on social media. In an act that exemplified his lack of emotional development, he had posted a long soliloquy declaring his devotion to his new lover, filled in his way with hyperbole and superlatives. The body was still warm, so to speak. I hadn't yet let my friends and family know we had split up. It's interesting to tell the story of Owen all these years later. I was heartbroken at the time. I genuinely loved him and was hurt and angry and most of all disappointed. The whole episode was a defining moment in my education and intimacy. It really was the first time I parsed out the different aspects of intimacy, putting my extraordinary relationship with Owen under the microscope, both in real time and in retrospect. I gleaned the distinction of how a relationship can be intensely intimate and simultaneously disconnected. For all his willingness and capacity for vulnerability in the sexual part of our relationship, he was utterly unreachable emotionally. Rooted in his unwillingness to be intimate with himself emotionally, he was unavailable to me in that arena as well. It was a relationship in high contrast, with some areas buzzing at full capacity and others were operating at a dull hum. From this awareness, I began to draw out the matrix as a model for achieving true and dimensional intimacy. So this is part of the journey of figuring out the nature of intimacy. And now what occurs to me is we talk a lot about emotional sobriety, especially in this group. It's the kind of the running theme. And so much of what we do, in my experience, and in many of the stories that I hear in the rooms, is when we stop escaping into our addiction, our substance or behavior or whatever it is that you're dealing with, we end up feeling our feelings on a new level, right? So what do we do with those feelings? And one of the things that we also do, or we talk about, is meditation and having a spiritual life and being spiritually fit, which to me is such, I mean, it really is the linchpin of my recovery and my sobriety, is my spiritual life. And I kind of, partly because I waited a long time to get sober, I was not a daily drinker. I have a typical allergy where I cannot drink for weeks and weeks and weeks, which makes my life really manageable, or easier to manage. If I have one drink, I have 5, I have 6. So I was able to wait a very long time to get sober. I also had a very, very rich spiritual life all the way along. And I find that now that I'm sober, that spiritual life is essential. It's essential. So what happens for me in letting go of the emotional aspect, or in what I talk about this in the book as well, but being able to step out of my emotions and witness myself having emotions, right? Which is part of how I see emotional sobriety, right? Like being able, or certainly the ability to witness ourselves or step into witness consciousness, where, I can say, like, I'm angry, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I'm troubled. I just went through a period where my whole life got turned upside down. And I thought to myself, boy, would I love a shot of tequila right now. I was able to say, I am a sober woman having some feelings. rather than like getting lost in the feelings and going down the rabbit hole of emotions and not being able to see straight because my emotions were overtaking me. I'm able to say, like, yes, I have all these emotions and I feel all this intense feelings, and I feel dysregulated, I feel ungrounded, and by the way, I can step up here and witness myself and say, this is Zoe having feelings. There's more to me than my emotions. There's a consciousness, there's a presence, there's a connection to source or God or the universe or however you name that for yourself. I I I have both these things. I'm a human and I'm a spirit and I'm spiritual. I'm a soul. And so that creates some space. I'm shaking my hands because it's really exciting space, right? And in that space is an energetic intimacy, right? Energetic intimacy is presence, and I've spoken about this actually, I think in the framework of self-esteem potentially. But that energetic intimacy, it is composed of a couple of elements. The energetic intimacy um, is presence, being able to see and experience what is actually happening, not what we're making something mean, not something that we're loading up from the past, not something that we're worrying about in the future, but actually hearing and receiving what is happening right in front of us as it is. Hard to do, right? Because the layer of emotions and anxiety is thick. There's like, we look through this lens of like, oh, I know what's going to happen. It's our nervous system trying to keep us safe, in maladaptive ways. And so when we're able to be present to something as it is, in those moments with Owen, we were absolutely present to each other in those moments as they existed. We were just lost in each other, just without at like soul to soul, without the loaded up with like, is this person going to stay in my life? Am I going to get hurt? What is he going to think of the way my genitals look? Like all of those things that we tend to bring to a moment of intimacy or vulnerability. We were able to just let all that go and just be as we were. So powerful. In his case, he couldn't be with his emotions in that same way. He could be with sex in that way. He could not be with his emotional life in that way. And he certainly couldn't be with my emotions. He had some inkling about that because he gave me a vocabulary list of words that I couldn't say that would trigger him. I couldn't say sisterhood. There was like a whole list of things that I couldn't say. And I was, I mean, he was so compelling in so many ways that I was just curious, and there I was, like, really, that's a second part of like energetic intimacy, is that there's a presence and there's a curiosity. Like, what actually is happening in this moment? Like, what am I experiencing? What is this about? How does this feel in my body? What is right in front of me? Like, there's a curiosity to learn more, to discover more. There's also a humility, right? This moment isn't necessarily about me. There's something else happening. I am part of a much larger context. So those are three components of energetic intimacy. And when I realized that physical intimacy, I learned early on, I don't know if I learned or it's just part of my makeup. Some people, for some people, and I know this from my work, emotional intimacy and physical intimacy are very intertwined. And for some people, they are not. And a lot of people like to think that for men, testosterone-based life forms, that emotions and sex, physical intimacy and emotional intimacy are very separated, or more easily separated, and that for women or people with vulvas, estrogen based life forms, that those two things are very intertwined. There's even books on that make that distinction. I don't buy it, actually. I think that a lot of it, and there's a whole chapter in my book called The Attachment Myth. I think women are conditioned. I think that it's probably an equal split. I know many, many men I've worked with as clients, many men for whom emotions and sex are very intertwined. And I think that women are largely conditioned to believe that when I have a client who said to me in a women's group that I run, she said, my heart is in my vagina. I have sex with anybody and I fall in love with them. And I thought, you know what? A, that's not emotional sobriety. B, that's conditioning. And C, it's problems with attachment style, right? So I think that what I've come to is that for some people, they prefer, and I honor this, I think that's great, that they have an emotional safety and an emotional component to having sex. And for some people, sex is a very different piece. And that's healthy, can be healthy for some people, for half of us, really, actually. So I've been playing with this idea of emotional intimacy and emotional intimacy and physical intimacy, and how they intertwine and how they are different, and how we can work and cultivate both of those things and explore the relationship between those two. I had done that many years before I ever met Owen. Then when I met Owen, all of a sudden I was like, yeah, this is deeper than physical. This is not casual sex. There's something really deep and foundational happening. If it's not emotional, what is it? What is it? It's energy. It's energetic intimacy. And I could call it presence. For a long time I did, but I think that when I started to really look into energy and really research it and really start to explore what energetic intimacy might mean, it really rang true to me. It really took shape as a legitimate piece of the intimacy and human connection puzzle. I'm going to read you a little bit about energy. Energy is recognized in many parts of the world as a legitimate and intrinsic part of overall health and wellness of the human body and mind. In fact, energy is the central focus of most Eastern disciplines of medicine and physiology. In traditional Chinese medicine, everything is made up of qi, life force energy. Balanced and abundant qi is the key to good health, mentally, physically, and emotionally. All physical ailments are a result of an imbalance in qi. Qi is balanced through acupuncture, herbs, tai chi, qigong, meditation, and diet. Similarly, the basis of wellness in traditional Indian medicine is the balance of energy. Ayurveda defines a complex system of 3 energy principles, or doshas, in the body: vata, pitta, and kapha, as well as universal life force energy, prana. The yogic system of physiology names 7 energy centers in the body called chakras, which essentially run the length of the spine, starting at the sacrum and ending at the crown of the head. Vibrant health in all aspects depends on the ability of energy to flow freely up and down the chakras through channels called nadis on either side of the spine. The energetics of human physiology is considered such a significant part of existence, it's referred to as the subtle body. A solid, perishable body, our physical body, is called the gross body, while the subtle body lives on after death, merging back into the energy of the universe. As Albert Einstein puts it, later in his life, in his more metaphysical phase. He said, everything is energy, and that's all there is to it. Match the frequency of the reality you want, and you cannot help but get that reality. It could be no other way. This is not philosophy. So you might be someone who feels deeply connected to their intuition and relies on it regularly as a navigational tool in orienteering your life. Most of us live in a world in which our thoughts, ideas, and decisions rely heavily on that which we can know because we experience it directly with one or more of our five senses. We don't have a direct experience outside of these parameters that we trust. It's only through the filter or translation of a priest, a minister, a rabbi, an imam, or other religious leader that we're willing to trust that which cannot be proven. I'm not invalidating such bringers of divine mystery into our lives. I'm simply saying our full experience of radical intimacy is dependent on our willingness to embrace the reality of something we can directly feel ourselves, even though we cannot empirically verify, prove, or qualify its existence. There is a space between science and the divine, between intellectual and spiritual, between factual and woo-woo. It's in this in-between space that you'll find great opportunity for a dimensional shift of your relationship with yourself, others, and the world. What does this look like in a rubber hits the road kind of way? For one thing, it means that you can walk into a room and feel the energy. Think about how different it feels to walk into a yoga class versus a funeral versus a room full of high school seniors taking the SAT. Of course, the SAT is a standardized test. I don't know if all of you know that. It's quickly becoming an outdated reference. A room full of high school seniors taking their algebra final. Of course, you can observe what these three distinct groups of people are doing, the expressions on their faces, and the ways in which they are communicating with each other or not. You can deduce and maybe even attune to their mental and emotional states collectively and individually. However, additionally, there is an energy in the space that exists beyond the collection of people in the room. That energy might feel tense, congested, heavy, or it might feel open, expansive, buoyant. If you say that the room filled with mourners felt sad, you are talking about emotions, not energy. Energetically, that same room felt dense and heavy, which perhaps resulted in you feeling sad emotionally and disoriented physically. The energy in the yoga studio was expansive and clear, which resulted in you feeling joyful and alive. The same goes for your own personal energy. You might be grappling with a situation in which you feel stuck and unable to make a decision. The energy you feel is stagnant and stale. The emotions you feel are depressed and confused, whereas physically you feel anxious and tired. We can look for the energy of an experience alongside the physical and the emotional. While our physical world is completely objective, our emotional world is fully subjective. You get that? The physical world is objective. We can experience it through our five senses empirically, right? The emotional world is totally subjective. We feel what we feel. It's real. It's a real phenomenon. But how I react emotionally to something may be completely different than the way you react to it emotionally. So there's a distinction between the emotional world and the physical world in its objective and subjective nature. Our energetic world lies somewhere between. The distinction between emotions and energy and the way we feel offer two different ways to evaluate both the content and the context of a current circumstance. The additional perspective energy provides can be tremendously helpful, especially when emotions are running high. It's almost like neutral ground, especially when you're working with a couple. I often work with my clients to understand their circumstances through the lens of energy that they feel, as opposed to the energy they want to feel. So energy becomes really this equal third prong on the sort of triad of processing our experiences and becoming what I feel is skillful in self-development, in the way we relate to ourselves and others and the world. So that's what I got today. I'm really anxious to hear what you have to say, to hear your questions, to hear your experiences, and to see if any of this makes sense at all. You for sharing. It's tricky. I mean, it is tricky. And part of getting out of an abusive or abuse like relationship is learning really to trust yourself, right? It's very hard. And listen, I'm all for the rush of that kind of connection and presence and all of that. One of the things that in hindsight, had I known what I know now about sex addiction, sex and love addiction, is the nature of this 3 days of texting. And I'll tell you something, as a gift to him for his birthday, I think it must have been. No, it wasn't. I don't know what I would have given him a gift for. Maybe I just did it, but I printed out, which was no small feat given like technologically. I printed out those 3 days of texts of back and forth, and I made it into, and I bound it into a book for him. I think I called it The First 3 Days or something. And there was a compulsive quality to that. There was like an addictive, compulsive quality to that. It was over the top. He's always talking in like these sort of, like I said, hyperboles and superlatives and very dramatic. And, he's retired. So it wasn't too surprising that he had a lot of time to spare on this. But something tells me that if he were working or he were he probably would have done it anyway. And hearing some of his stories over the months that we were involved, I missed some of the things along the way, that he lived in this heightened state of arousal all the time. And so one of the things that I looked for when I was dating, I'm married now. One of the things that I always sort of looked for, especially after that, the lesson that I learned was that I need to be with someone who has been through some shit and can speak about it in a way that's grounded and honest and vulnerable, that isn't wrapped in some mythical story about it. He told great stories, this guy, but there wasn't ever a moment where he was willing and able to self-reflect and to take ownership of some of his feelings and behaviors and experiences. It was always someone else's fault. Someone else was always doing something to him. Someone else was always wrong. He had terrible road rage, and they were just people driving around. There was an emotional lack of sobriety that existed. So when I met my husband, who is a widower, his wife died. He actually lost, in the aftermath of that, was seeing somebody that was a dry alcoholic and was incredibly abusive. And then he lost everything, and declared bankruptcy and had to live with a friend. And he could speak to all of those experiences with a good deal of he had done 10 years of Zen training. So he was able to really say those were the best things that ever happened to me because of the way that I grew from that. That's something that you want to hear, along with the electric, scintillating, delicious energy of desire and attraction, right?
Okay.
There's the both. It needs to be grounded in uh, what Owen didn't have, which was an ability to self-reflect and to speak about the ugliness in himself. I think that as you get your sea legs and as you develop in your own self and learn to trust yourself, you're going to have both of those. But, you know, I'm a sexologist. Sexual desire and attraction and arousal is like, you know, that is life force energy. That is the goodness of life. And we always want to feel that way, but it's not the only thing. We don't sacrifice the rest of the relationship and all the other dimensions of intimacy only for that piece. That needs to be in balance with everything. I name 6, and if any of you have a pen and are interested in this, this is a good time to jot down. There are 6 areas, 6 buckets to look at. Family of origin, or the people who raised you, you know, for some of us weren't raised by our parents, but whoever raised you when you grew up. Society, just like you say, it's different. You have different influences, different messages. You receive different messages if you were a girl growing up in Germany or a boy growing up in Nigeria, or, you know, all over the world, we have different societies. Religion, like the, you know, gold star of messaging around sexuality and our bodies. Advertising, entertainment, pornography. Those are the 6 areas to start to look at. And if you, what I like to say is take a week for each one. And I'm not a journaler. I'm an author and a writer, and I hate journaling, but maybe because I'm a writer. But start to journal and write down your thoughts and meditate and think and do a deep dive into like one thing at a time. You know, when in my family there were, you know, my parents were very openly affectionate, right? I saw them hugging and kissing and dancing and having and being affectionate with each other. My father was not particularly sexual. He was actually pretty Norwegian. My mother was Eastern European, New York Jew, many generations, and my father was the son of Norwegian immigrants. So very different sort of, my mother is like, still, she's 92. She's the biggest flirt around. My father was much more reserved. So there was that, and that definitely influenced me. It influenced my relationship with men, what I look for in men. It influenced my relationship with my father. So there's that, right? There are stories about, I'm doing this with one topic. I'm not going to go through all 6, but this is the kind of work that I'm inviting you to do around conditioning. In this country, there's a thing about when girls reach puberty and the adolescence and they start to become more like women, you will often hear somebody say to a father of a teenage girl, you're going to need to get a shotgun. Oh my goodness, she's all grown up. You're going to need to have a shotgun. And if you really sit with that, you know, it's like a ha, no big deal. But when you really look at that, what the messaging is there is that, oh, you are like, as the teenage girl, you're so attractive and sexually arousing that men are going to behave badly around you. So you're a danger. You're inviting boys into bad behavior, and you need another man to defend you against that behavior. Like there's a real foundational message that gets internalized as truth. Boys will be boys. Boys are gonna want to hurt you, but you know, it's like this rapey culture. And So that plays out in various forms, way back to, like, being on the playground with boys. Boys are more physical. Boys, if they like you, they tease you. They're mean to you if they like you. Like, all this stuff that we play out as adults. I know we do, because I'm the one who's helping people explore why they're so crippled in the bedroom and in their relationships. And it's undoubtedly a good piece of it is, we can pull all the way back, to these messages and ways in which we make ourselves small or limited. Or so if you go through those 6 categories and you really start to open up your mind into, like, start with, like, what are the messages that I heard? What are the things that I took into, advertising? I'm too hairy. I smell funny. I need to dye my hair.
Mhm.
Can't have any wrinkles. There's so many things. Um, my big thing was the Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition. Why isn't this a magazine dedicated to celebrating athleticism and strong bodies? And why are we now, like, the biggest selling issue is women who are not athletic, who look like porn stars, who are in bikinis, like half naked or
Mhm.
90% naked. Like, what is that saying about women athletes and their bodies? And what does that say about me, who's neither? I'm not a I'm not a porn star. I don't look like a porn star, and I don't look like an athlete. I'm, like, invisible and worthless and not attractive. So there's so much to look at in terms of our conditioning. I'm just, since I took a little bit more time for this discussion period, I'm just going to also tell you that after you make a list of all of these things, write it all down, put it in a box, put that box on the top shelf in the back of the closet, and start to um, tell yourself, change the narrative in your own head, and do some deep work, either with outside help or reading books like Come As You Are, uh, or Our Bodies Ourselves, or, a lot of Body Neutral is like a body image book. Whatever your area, whatever that work is. And then, wait a while, take the box down and take an inventory and go through. Some of those things will have fallen off. Some of those things you've unwound. You can have a positive affirmation for all the negative, to undo all the negative self-talk. And anything that continues to feel sticky, put it back in the box and put it up in the closet again, you know? So that's the beginning of the work of looking at the conditioning. And the truth is that what I was reading is a part of the book in which I was explaining how I came upon the distinction between emotional intimacy and energetic intimacy. I could tell that same story, um, 6 different ways. And one of the ways that I can tell the story was my dating history and the kinds of men that I was dating and the people that I was looking for. Um, and I could tell the story of, like, meeting somebody who finally, one of the disappointments was that I met somebody in this area of California and Los Angeles that I have found to be culturally devoid. Like, nobody knows anything about art around here, and certainly in where I live. And I met this man that, like, I could talk for hours about art. I have a degree in art history, actually, and that's ancient history in my life, and it's a piece of that relationally, that I shared with my dad, a passion. And, like, here was this man, and I could, like, have this. And so there was a lot of my own discovery. And so I could tell that story. It would sound completely different about my own discoveries and sacrificing pieces of of my own sort of relational well-being, because the sex and was so good and the art was so good. Um, I could also tell the story through my relationship with alcohol, and actually realizing that, I mean, that was actually it wasn't the first time I thought I had a problem with alcohol. There were certainly many times before that, actually, but I it was the first time I realized how out of control I was, how powerless I was to alcohol. I mean, really powerless. Um, and so I could tell that whole story through my relationship with alcohol. So it sounded the way it did because I was able to observe him in such a clear way, you know. The it was Facebook, actually. I didn't I said social media, but you're right, it was Facebook. And um that actually was a perfect thing for me to see. It was a gift. It was shocking and it was really hurtful to me, but like I remember actually laughing because it was the perfect validation that he was just, this is a pattern of his. He love bombs people. They're like the greatest thing in the whole world. And then, you know, as soon as he feels emotionally challenged, it can't work out and he moves on to the next thing and gets that rush in the beginning. I know this now to be a pattern. It's a very typical SLA patterns. And so but that was like that was all the validation that I needed. There was going to be no working this out because he had moved on. He was in his cycle of whatever it is that he does. And it was just a good evidence for me. You can definitely have an emotion, I mean, an energetic connection with someone. If you imagine a situation like this,
Mhm.
you're sitting in a Starbucks and you're having a coffee and somebody walks in and your eyes meet and and it can be a sexual thing. It can stir feelings of you know, a physical attraction, that arousal, or it can just be an incredibly interesting looking person that you'd love to sit down with, you know, that, I mean, I see those people all the time where I'm like, "Ooh, who is that?" You know? And you could, you know, your eyes can meet and there's like an acknowledgement of each other, like a mutual interest, you know, that's energy. That's an energetic connection. You don't know anything about this person. You don't have feelings. You're not in a relationship with this person and you're not touching this person, you know, you're not even, it's not that. And maybe the example is made best by someone that you wouldn't necessarily have sex with, you know, but there's an interest and an energy and a presence and that sort of chemistry. I am going to be really honest with you guys, really honest. Um, it is, I have a lot of women come through my door, like honestly, a lot of women. And the story with a similar story, the story goes like this.
Mhm.
Type are assholes. I dated assholes. I dated the like narcissistic jerks all my you know, young life, and then I finally met a really nice guy and I married him and the sex is terrible and I'm not attracted. And and the answer, I have one question that says a lot. And the question is, was the sex ever good? And for many of them, the answer is yes. And that is something that we can work with. If there really is an initial attraction, you can work with that and cultivate it. And very often what it means is that you're reconciling with your own, I mean, always really, but there is a relational component because then you're working with both couples and cultivating something exciting and delicious. Um, but really what it takes is you sort of expanding what sex means to you and why you're using it. And very often when we are, this is myself included, but it's not just myself, when we are attracted to that crazy, hot, dangerous kind of energy, we are escaping real intimacy in ourselves, like an emotional intimacy and connectedness in ourselves. So it also, it tends to bring out a side of ourselves, especially if we're women and sort of conditioned to feel like we need to be good girls, that we can play in an arena that is can be very liberating because we step outside the constraints of what we think we're supposed to be like. I don't know if that makes sense. That's kind of a whole other workshop. You can achieve that through role play and through a good sort of separation of sort of like the business of running a household and in the bedroom. You have to be able to sort of work that connection and participate in cultivating that connection. But you can have both. You just need to start with someone who is good and safe and healthy, and there's a genuine attraction there. Feelings of shame around sexuality are unbelievably common, and it's always rooted in some sort of conditioning. And it's not really in any way, shape, or form related to what's actually happening. So our brain is our biggest sex organ. Right. It's inextricable. How we think about sex affects how we feel when we have sex and how we feel after we have sex. So it's really rooted in what is happening. The shame is, I mean, I still love Brene Brown's definition of shame most of all. Shame is the belief that we are so bad or broken that we are unworthy of love and belonging. So somewhere in you is the belief that having sex or self-pleasuring or sexual pleasure makes you bad or broken and unworthy of love and belonging. So I would take a look at what has you feeling that way and start to unwind that. I can say, as someone in the field of sexuality and a certified sexologist, that that contrary to what many of us have been led to believe, sex is, whether it's solo sex or partnered sex, is an unbelievably healthy form of self-expression. When I was not looking, it's not that I wanted him to love me. I mean, love me, and it wasn't about forming a relationship and how did he feel about me. It was, he would get angry at me. Like, I actually wasn't necessarily looking for an exclusive relationship at that time in my life. So what I mean by him being emotionally unavailable was that he would get enraged. I mean, I would say something. We were driving out to a festival where I was teaching. I teach regularly for like 10 years, and we were driving out there. He was coming with me. It's about 3-hour drive from where I live. And he and I mentioned something about like I use the term the sisterhood, like a sisterhood in terms of like women and the women that I work with, and he got silent. And then I didn't really realize that he wasn't talking to me. And then I started talking to him and he like blew up at me. And I said, what? And it was like he was picking a fight about something totally inconceivable. Like I didn't understand what was happening. And so then it turns out after several hours of him being angry at me and try and like having to and being fired up and having to argue with me, then it turns out that he reveals that he can't tolerate that I said sisterhood. And he had this previous girlfriend who had used that term in a way that uh
Um,
that didn't work for him. So then that was like,
okay.
okay, all right, I understand now. So I found myself in these conflicts with him and not being able to navigate it. It wasn't that I wanted him to commit to me or that it was
Um,
about the relationship. It was just about hanging out together. You know what? I'm just gonna say that there are so many. What I hear is that you might know, you might you might have walked this path already, but it sounds to me people who are in your position, and there are many, many, many of them, you are certainly not alone, often have some form of trauma in their early life. And there are so many, thank God, there are so many advances in our understanding of trauma and how that lives in the body and how that lives in our minds and the effects that early trauma can have on us. Um, Bessel van der Kolk wrote The Body Keeps the Score, Gabor Mate in the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, and his new book, The Myth of Normal. There's so many trauma-informed therapists and trauma-trained therapists. Somatic experiencing is a great modality, EMDR, brain spotting, polyvagal theory. There are so many ways and resources for us now to um, understand and process and heal from trauma so that it doesn't drive our behavior, so that we have a level of awareness and we can start to catch ourselves when we start playing out that cycle, or when we hear that voice in our head, or we can recognize when our nervous system is activated and we're starting to like circle the rabbit hole of triggers, right? And
Mhm.
and in that we have a like a launch sequence that we can use to bring ourselves back to ourselves, to be present with what is actually happening, and accurately assess risk, so that we're not walking around acting on perceived risk that is actually based in something that happened in ancient history, in our ancient history, in the past, you know? Our nervous system is trying, when we have suffered trauma or we're acting in ways that um that is consistent with someone who's been hurt or traumatized, and is looking for something that they're also preventing themselves from happening, that is that's like, we have ways of dealing with that now. We can recognize that as a very common phenomenon. And so really unwinding that and getting some outside help in dealing with that and catching yourself and having coping mechanisms for self-regulating is available, and really in my estimation the best thing that you can do for yourself. Thank you to everybody for the opportunity to be of service. I really love coming to this group. I love the questions. I love the comments. I love to hear the stories. It's really I do a lot of speaking, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be myself and to just sort of identify as an alcoholic with impunity, and just be amongst the fellow in the fellowship. And so thank you to Patrick for inviting me, and thank you to Susie for running the show, and thank you to all of you for showing up and participating. I am very grateful.